Hello, everyone. Welcome to 1.5 Degrees, the podcast where together we explore the science, solutions, and stories involved in the fight against climate change. I'm your host, Heidi Pan, speaking with the professionals behind the latest research, policies, culture, and innovations shaping our response to global environmental challenges. For today's episode, we are joined by Ian Dooley, who is a senior associate attorney for Earthjustice's Anchorage office, to discuss the state of the case against the Willow Project, his work in challenging oil and gas activity occurring in the Western Arctic, and pushing the federal government to better consider the climate change impacts of its decisions, especially on the people and the life that depend on and call the Arctic home. Before joining Earthjustice, Ian was a public defender in the Bronx and worked for more than a decade throughout the western United States and Alaska as a forest firefighter. Thank you so much for being here today, Ian. It's truly an honor.
Thank you, Heidi. It's a pleasure to be here.
To get started, can you tell me a little bit more about the mission of Earthjustice and what it is that you do as a senior associate attorney?
Yeah. Well, Earthjustice, as some of your viewers may know, is a nonprofit law firm that advocates on behalf of its partners and clients. We do our work for free for the partners, the clients that we represent. We're supported largely by the generous donations of the people that support the organization. We have offices across the nation, but we're based out of San Francisco. And the work that our organization then does varies widely, from oil and gas to hard rock mining to community health issues, social justice issues, at least insofar as they relate to environmental justice issues. We have a litigation arm of the organization or program, which I'm involved in, obviously, as a senior associate attorney. And I think last I recall, I think we were more than 200, maybe even 300 lawyers across the nation. Not sure how many total, but I think overall the organization employs around 500 people. And the other really important parts of our group include all the professional staff that do all of that support work, who are laser focused on the mission, as well as our communications department, who does a lot of the advocacy and help support, for example, the massive social media campaign trying to elevate Willow before the Biden administration and before the people, and get it into the papers and make sure people knew what was going on, which was remarkably successful. And then also we have a policy and legislation team that works a lot with folks in DC or at state level, depending on which state the office is located in, to work on helping to develop policy and affect legislation that might benefit our partners, our clients, and our mission. Yeah, so that's Earthjustice. And then I guess how I fit into that is I'm a senior associate, so I'm part of a few different teams within our office. We have a small office. I think our offices in Alaska are actually two offices. There's one in Anchorage, which is the largest city in Alaska. It's a city of about 300,000 people. And then another office is in Juneau, which is the state capital in Southeast Alaska. And I don't remember our numbers exactly, but I think we're right around 15 people total. So we're a fairly small, scrappy group of people. And as a senior associate, I'm usually supporting a senior attorney who's essentially a staff attorney, someone who's been here longer. And then we have a deputy managing and a managing attorney, and that's sort of our structure. But for me, I work mostly on the Western Arctic. We have a Western Arctic team, and that is the team that has led the litigation challenging the Willow Project. And then a lot of our work is focused on other oil and gas development activity, exploration and production that's occurring in that region on these federal public lands. I work on a lot of several other smaller projects as well, and different partnership development and a wide variety of tasks. But the primary thing that I do is focus on litigation, defending the Western Arctic.
Yeah, no, the work that you do is really important. And in terms of like the scope of what Earthjustice does, it's really amazing, the work that you're doing. I guess also for some background for listeners, can you also provide like a brief overview of what the Willow Project is and its significance, and also what concerns or issues led Earthjustice to focus on this issue in particular and file a lawsuit?
Yeah, so Willow is a project that has been proposed by ConocoPhillips. They've explored this part of the Arctic, which we call the Western Arctic, which is located in the National Petroleum Reserve Arctic, which we just call the reserve. It's about a 23 million acre space of public land that's held by the federal government. So it's the largest piece of federal land in the nation. It's about the size of Indiana. Just to give you some idea, it's just one piece of Alaska. Alaska is massive. It's I think 3 times the size of Texas. It's a very big place, and it's hard to wrap your mind around, frankly, even for someone who lives here. So the Willow Project is a project occurring in the eastern portion of this area, very near the Colville River, which is the largest, most productive river in the Arctic, and very near the city and village community of Nuiqsut, which is a tribal community, Inuit community in the Arctic, whose folks have been most affected by oil and gas development, because almost all of this has been occurring directly around the community. And Willow is one other project that will effectively surround their community with oil and gas activity. But the project itself is a 30-year commitment to develop and produce oil from this area, and will result in hundreds of millions of barrels of oil being produced. And of course, the result of that is that oil will be burned, refined and burned, and the emissions from that results in hundreds of millions of metric tons of greenhouse gases, which are, in this day and age, as we all know, facing climate change and what President Biden has deemed a climate crisis, are significant. Putting that aside, just the infrastructure of this project, the roads, the pipelines, the amount of development, the area that will be directly affected is thousands of acres, and this area is home to the ground-bearing caribou, which are these massive caribou herds that have existed up there for thousands of years and are remarkable, and also polar bears, other endangered species like eiders. It's home to millions of migratory birds from around the world, but particularly from the Americas. It's a unique and beautiful place where people have lived since time immemorial and subsisted since time immemorial, but that also is really, really vulnerable to climate change. The Arctic region, as your listeners may know, is the place most directly affected, at least in my view, by climate change, and that's supported by the evidence that it's warming at a rate of 4 times anywhere else in the world. It's heating 4 times the global rate of increase. And so the people, the life, the animals that exist there are paying the price for climate change, while many of us, including myself, for example, to be frank, enjoy the benefits of fossil fuels. We all do in some way or another. So I guess at the end of the day, I suppose Willow is locking in 30 years more of this type of thinking, where we're going to pull oil and gas from the ground and put it into cars and other conveyances that burn and combust this fuel and create this problem. And then I guess just the other thing I'll say is, in addition to Willow, this massive oil and gas development project by ConocoPhillips, the Texas-based oil gas giant, is going to unlock. Conoco has called this the next great Alaska hub, and what they've done is they've touted this project as to their investors, right, to the people that they're trying to make sure continue to support them and continue to see them as a financially viable and productive company, a profitable company. They have bragged that they've found more than 3 billion barrels of oil that could be leveraged from the Willow Project, meaning that this is just the beginning in Conoco's view, and that this could be locking us into more oil and gas development for decades, maybe more than half a century into the future, when we all know that the climate crisis is happening now and affecting people now. And of course, as you know, given the name of your podcast, that scientists agree that we have to avoid this 1.5 degree tipping point threshold to avoid the most catastrophic consequences of climate change. Does that answer your question?
Oh, no, very much so. I mean, there's so many things that you touched upon that just goes to show, like, not only just how devastating the Willow Project is, but I think also it's very important that you bring up how this is just kind of like the beginning if we allow ConocoPhillips to proceed in this manner. I mean, from the impacts on people and like the biodiversity in the Arctic, and also, of course, the aspect of that many barrels going into circulation again to like release more emissions. It's just overall quite horrible. So, I mean, understandably, when the work that you and other organizations have done to bring light to this project, there was a lot of pushback. But this isn't the first time that the Willow Project has been pushed back against. Like, I believe ConocoPhillips had started like the process of getting permits for this in like 2018 or so. Is there anything, I guess, like changing about the way that we're approaching this objection now? And how do you, I guess, anticipate this time around being different, possibly?
That's a really great question, Heidi. That's right. This project was previously permitted under the prior presidential administration. It was allowed to go forward. Same situation, essentially, that we're in now, except for last time, we and our partners in two lawsuits were able to successfully halt the project based on the unlawful authorization by the U.S. Bureau of Land Management and the Department of Interior. You know what's different this time? It's hard to say. I mean, it's a really good question. I hope it doesn't sound cynical, but I think at the end of the day, whether or not a project like this is improved is really a political decision. And what's different here is nothing in some sense, at least in our view. The agency has again permitted this project without following the law, and has done it so unlawfully under the National Environmental Policy Act, the Administrative Procedure Act, and the National Petroleum Reserves Production Act. And we have very strong claims that we feel very confident that we're going to win in court. And we again took the Bureau of Land Management, the Department of Interior, the federal government to court immediately upon the issuance of these permits. But we were unsuccessful this time in getting the court to agree with us to halt the project because the court disagreed with us that our clients and their members had showed what's called irreparable harm. That's the legal term of art to say that the activity that was approved this winter to allow the project to begin would cause irreparable harm to our clients and their members, namely that this would affect subsistence resources and people who live there and whose families are there, their ability to use and enjoy this area unaffected by the gravel. What they were doing is blasting holes in the ground this winter and then mining the gravel out to build a gravel road to set the stage for continued development in the coming winter. One thing that's important maybe to understand is that work up here in the Arctic, or up in the Arctic, I shouldn't say in the Arctic, I'm in Anchorage, which is a little south of the Arctic line, but anyway, in the Arctic, largely occurs in the winter time when the ground is supposed to be frozen enough to support the infrastructure and the gravel and the activities, the snow roads and the ice roads, so that these oil and gas development companies can go out there and do their work. So right now, we were unsuccessful in convincing the district court to do what we thought was best and to do what we thought the law required. We think that the district court got that wrong. Respectfully, with the district court, the facts here are identical almost to what they were previously. But again, this brings me back to trying to answer your question, which is that it's a political decision, I think, at the end of the day. And so there was no question under the prior presidential administration, probably. Maybe I shouldn't say no question, but there was people thought that our prior president and the administration and his agencies, that there was momentum potentially to support that project. And here, I think the question is a little bit more complicated. The current administration has done a lot of great things. The Inflation Reduction Act has provided billions of dollars to help effectively transition our economy from one that depends on fossil fuels to one that is more reliant on renewable energies, that a just transition so that more people can have equitable access to energy. And they've done a lot of great things. But I think perhaps maybe some of the, this is me speculating, I suppose, and I'm not supposed to do that, I suppose, but what you can maybe read between the lines is that Willow and perhaps the largest ever lease sale in the Gulf of Mexico approved under this administration were some kind of trade, political trade to allow for some other things. And we think that's a bad choice. We think that those things don't make sense, and we think that the need to transition is now. And there are a lot of considerations for why it should happen now, and people obviously could disagree about that. But things are different this time also because of the state of climate change. I mean, even 2 or 3 years ago, I don't think people were paying as much attention. Willow certainly didn't get as much public notice last time around as it did this time around. But I think the attitudes, in the last 5 years, people have really come to pay attention to the climate crisis. And I think that's because people are feeling it, and if they're not feeling it directly, if they don't think they're feeling it directly, they know someone who's feeling it directly, or they hear about it, they're reading about it, they're seeing the changes. I mean, the natural disasters that we read about. But that's just one easy example. But there's so much that you probably already know about that is happening across the globe that's affecting people. And among the people, last thing I'll say is among the people that are being affected is, it's the people among us who are least able to manage those severe effects. So, 1.5 degrees is an important target to avoid. But what I like to say is that, or I think it's important to remind people, is that people are hurting now because of what's happening, because of the warming that's happening now. And nowhere is this more true than in the Arctic, where they're experiencing these temperature increases. And therefore, we shouldn't be approving oil and gas projects in a place like this. We should be investing in a place like this and helping the people be supported through these billions of dollars that are available. We should be looking at other options to help wean this state and this country off of oil and gas.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point in the aspect of like there's limited time that we have in order to be able to address the climate crisis and I definitely think that for many people in response to this like approval by this administration, it felt sort of like a betrayal based off of like all of the campaigning that claimed that this would not happen with this administration. It was pretty devastating, I think, to learn about this approval. And I think also the aspect of the like the need to invest in this area, not necessarily towards oil, but towards alternative, like perhaps like clean energies is so much, it makes much more sense than to proceed with this. I guess I also wanted to ask about if in terms of like the goals or desired outcomes with this, what would you like, I guess, say is the desired outcome with this? Yeah.
Well, from my view, I'm an attorney. I work on a very specific case challenging this project because it was unlawfully permitted. And so the desired outcome is that no project would be unlawfully permitted. And it's hard to imagine a version of this project in this context when we're facing this climate crisis ever being approved. I won't say that nothing like it could ever be approved and survive legal scrutiny, but it's hard to imagine. We have laws that were set up to protect us from this type of activity in this kind of context. And so the outcome that I desire is that we're successful in demonstrating to the courts that this project was unlawfully approved. We get the court to vacate the permits, which means get rid of the permits, and that BLM, ConocoPhillips, if they want to, they go back to the drawing board and they try again if they'd like, or maybe they give up. Maybe they decide that, you know what, this is not the right place to be doing this kind of thing in this day and age. And, that might be what happens. And so.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the ideal circumstances. And I think also, I did want to ask also about, I guess, like maybe more in depth in terms of like legal proceedings. So I guess my question would be, what are some of the kind of main legal arguments that are, I guess, like kind of being presented this time around? You'd mentioned a lot of the kind of like acts that are being like blatantly violated by this project.
Yeah, I mean, if your reader or your viewers are interested, our complaints and our prior arguments are available. They're publicly available on the court's website, so that anybody that wants to get more details can read into those. But I'll say broadly speaking that that the Bureau of Land Management, which is a bureau within the Department of Interior, which is the agency responsible for permitting this project, we say that they arbitrarily constrain their own authority to say no to this project, to consider other alternatives to this project, by essentially saying that they believe they had to allow ConocoPhillips to develop some oil and gas from these leases. And we just think that's wrong. That's not what the law says. And so that's one argument. And that was an argument that we made successfully the last time around. That was an argument that the district court agreed with us on the last time around. And we're making it again. And we think it's the same argument and the same premise. They've changed some words, they've done some things, but it's exactly, I won't say exactly, but essentially the same it's the same problem that they left unfixed last time. They didn't fix it this time, I'll say. Another problem is that they failed to, again, look at the full climate consequences of this project. I mentioned earlier that this project has been touted, billed by ConocoPhillips to be the next great Alaska hub to ensure decades more oil and gas production for these companies and for their shareholders. But we say that the Bureau of Land Management didn't look at that very well. They didn't look at what that looks. They didn't look at the impacts that could arise should that additional development occur in the future. So that's another way that the agency has failed to consider the impacts, is that the further greenhouse gas emissions that could occur from future development that ConocoPhillips is selling to its shareholders is, maybe not saying it's certainly going to happen, but they say, hey, you should keep investing in us because we've identified all this oil and gas that we're going to get after Willow. And the agency, BLM, didn't look at what the effects of that development is. And we're saying, well, the law requires you to look at that, and you didn't. So therefore, this decision is unlawful and should be sent back. There are a number of other claims and arguments that we're going to put forth, that we are, I guess, considering and have alleged in our complaint, including violations of the Endangered Species Act, the agency's failure to follow the Endangered Species Act in consideration of polar bears, sea ice loss, and the effect of climate change on sea ice loss, things that I don't want to be flippant about it, but in some respects seem kind of like a no-brainer in this day and age. And I'll say that the agency did more this time around. I'll give them credit where credit is due. They did a lot more in their analysis of climate change this time around, but they have to fully assess climate change, and they didn't do that. And there are several ways in which we point out that they didn't fully assess the effects of this project on climate, and they're required to. So that's some of what we're arguing in our brief, or we have argued and have presented our complaint and are preparing potentially to argue in our brief.
Yeah, no, I definitely will be, I guess, linking all the resources that Earthjustice has on kind of your legal arguments. And no, it's quite mind-boggling to hear all the kind of key legal and regulatory frameworks that are just kind of being disregarded and violated. I did also want to ask, I guess, are there any precedents or I guess similar cases that Earthjustice is drawing upon in its legal arguments? And also, I mean, there's multiple cases that are kind of similar to this situation that we've kind of seen for sure in the past.
Yeah, well, I guess the key case that we're relying on is our success last time. The district court issued I think near 100-page decision that found for us on every single claim that we alleged, except for I think one, if I recall. So it was a resounding rejection of the agency's permitting of the project last time around, and we think that decision should essentially be the same this time around. There are a few different claims and legal issues, and I don't think there's any that come to mind right now. There's no specific precedent other than Willow 1 the first time around, that are sort of guaranteed to provide a thematic role in the legal arguments. Oftentimes what happens is arguments are pieced together from different pieces because there's just so much nuance in the legal argument that it's bits and pieces of different opinions that support different ideas that relate to different cases in the specific context in those cases, which vary widely.
Yeah, no, definitely. In this process, you're also, I'm sure, working with a lot of other organizations. It's not just Earthjustice that's, suing this, the BLM. So I guess what are how do you work, I guess, collaboratively with all the organizations and also the people that are directly impacted by this?
Yeah, I mean it's a important part of what we do is the coalition building and collaboration with people that are directly affected by this, and then also with these partners like you're talking about at the broader level. It runs the gamut. I mean, there's people all the way from Washington D.C. to Nuiqsut in Alaska that are paying attention to this project, and we are a law firm, so primarily what we do is litigate these issues. But we also do our best to help facilitate partnership and collaboration. And there's a coalition of groups, like large, what we might call green groups or traditionally conservation groups like Sierra Club and locally the Alaska Wilderness League, the Wilderness Society, Natural Resources Defense Council, and so on that are invested in changing the trajectory of oil and gas development in the Arctic. But then at a local level, to the other side of your question, just engaging with the people that we know and the people that we've built partnerships with who can help us understand what's going on with folks in the community and how can we support them, or what is it that people are saying, and how should we be considering our work and how that could be affecting people. So it's really complex. And at the end of the day, there are people, I guess I said, all the way from the local level doing advocacy work at the local level, face to face, to people in DC meeting with high level officials and talking with folks like Secretary Holland, trying to help make decisions that are best for people in Alaska, and then all across the nation. And you can even think about it, it's a global problem now. So really trying to make a change based on what people think is in the best interest of all of us. And so yeah, it's complex, but it's wide reaching, and it's just a lot of talking to people and just having good conversations with people and getting feedback, listening, trying to hear what people are worried about, and then also trying to say, oh, this is what I'm thinking about. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's so important to kind of like be able to, I guess, not only be receptive of like, I guess, feedback, but also to kind of realize that this is such a complex issue and with complex consequences as well. I guess the kind of last question related to this whole thing is, I guess, what are some potential broader implications or consequences regardless, or I guess like dependent upon the outcome of this, on similar energy or infrastructure projects that are to come in the future?
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know how broadly I can speak about that. I will say, kind of similar to a question we were talking about previously, that I think there was an article written about another project that we've challenged several months back that just said that, where we're working on is on what is called federal public land. These are lands that may, that they were not ceded from tribal groups, but these are lands that are being managed by the Bureau of Land Management, or considered what we call public lands. And this project in particular, if it was to go away, there's a with the change in the context of how people are supporting oil and gas development and the way we're thinking about climate change, it's possible that other oil and gas development companies would say, this is too expensive, the litigation risks are too high, we're going to stop doing this work here. They might try to focus their work somewhere else, and that might not be the best solution either, always. But all we can do is work on the problem that's right in front of us, and this is the problem that's right in front of us. So hopefully it has broader consequences, and with the folks like yourselves, folks like you and your listeners, trying to be more engaged on changing the narrative and ensuring a just transition away from fossil fuel development. Hopefully the timing is right, that if we're successful in Willow, that will buy everybody a little bit more time, and it'll send a message more broadly to federal officials that this isn't the way that people want to go anymore. And hopefully that has a longer term change. But I'm kind of dancing on your question, but I really don't know. I don't know the answer to your question overall, because I'm not engaged in all those projects. There's just so much happening all the time across the country in terms of oil and gas development, mining, renewables, and try to think about how we can tie all that together. It's a big undertaking.
Yeah, no, definitely. It is a rather broad question, and I think that definitely it is quite uncertain. I guess, to use your words, what is right in front of us now, and what might happen in the future. But yeah, I mean, it's so important to like be engaged in these conversations and to stay aware of this. I do want to ask about more like kind of your job as an attorney for Earthjustice. I guess like to start, like how did you come to work at Earthjustice? I know before you used to be a firefighter, which is really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a long story, but I'll just say that I've had the ability, the good fortune to I grew up like in a rural community, and to be close to them in my, I guess on a personal level, like I was raised in among natural resources. My mother did a good job of keeping us close to the rivers and mountains and creeks and whatnot. So that was always just part of who I was. And then, more broadly speaking, my family, that's just where I come from. And then I I was also lucky to fall into the firefighting thing when I was young, because that gave me an opportunity to work out in the woods all the time. And so I did that from a young age. From the age of 18, I was a firefighter for, as I said, more than a decade, almost like 14 years or something like that, 14 fire seasons. And I was also fortunate because of that job and my place in the world that I was able to travel some, and I was able to meet people from different places and to think about the environmental circumstances that people were facing, and meet really great people like Manuela Peak, who was a professor that I met when I was studying in Ecuador through an exchange program, who taught me about environmental security and this concept of how environmental degradation and climate insecurity and food insecurity can have really volatile impacts on people on an individual and community level, including, physical violence, and to think about it that way. So my work, I come at this, like the public defender job that I had previously was not an accident, I guess. It's, to me, that's just as much of an environmental question that is happening, that there are causes and effects that are occurring based on the choices that we make about our resources and who gets to enjoy those resources and who gets less access to those resources. And so I think the problem here is very similar. So that's kind of what has driven my mind. And then most recently, I was able to volunteer for a law firm in Guatemala called the Bufete para Pueblos Indígenas, which is a Mayan founded and run law firm led by Juan Castro down there. And it was during that time that I came across this job posting for Earthjustice in Alaska. And I'd worked up here as a firefighter previously out of Fairbanks. So I knew I loved Alaska. And then I also, in my mind, the nexus between climate change and the Arctic, and the fact that tribal communities are among the most affected by both climate change, but also by the difficult socioeconomic circumstances that many communities face. For example, I just heard a thing on the radio this morning, right, that Alaska youth are among the people with the highest suicide rates, for example, and they may be the highest, is what this radio report said on my way to work with my wife this morning. And so anyway, to me, this is a place that is both an emergency in some sense, and like a place that's just so rich with history and ideas and rich with experience, that I was really excited to get back to Alaska and to engage in this work and to continue that environmental security framework that I developed in my mind, and to continue trying to work in and be close to nature, which was part of my roots and my upbringing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's like really awesome that you kind of were going from, I guess, like being raised to be close to nature to kind of like working in something that's like kind of not exactly on the front lines, but like really you're working on something that's really making a big impact. And I do also want to ask, like, I guess, what is like a favorite or a least favorite aspect of your job that you do now?
Yeah. Well, favorite is just working with people, and it's both my favorite and least favorite thing about this job is that I get to work with a lot of great people working on big issues and smart people, and I've learned so much being here and thinking more about the big picture. It's not something that I've engaged in. My work as a public defender was very one-on-one, thinking about the immediate situation. And, it wasn't impact litigation, it was direct litigation. This is a much broader effort that we're engaged in up here. And I'll say that's my least favorite part of the job too, because I don't get to engage with people like I did before. Like I love being working in the Bronx with clients, getting to know them and their family and their circumstances, and being out in the streets, getting familiar with the places that I'm involved in. Here, 99.8% of my work is right here, staring at this computer screen, and that's a tough trade-off in a lot of ways, I guess I can't understate how difficult that is when, as I said before, I'm someone who really loves being in nature and kind of needs that. But I do what I can on my personal side of life to balance that out. But so yeah, it's the people, both the best and the hardest thing. The best people that I work with, and then just wishing to be able to work more directly with people on a day-to-day basis. I miss that.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I also want to ask, I guess, like if someone that wanted to do what you're doing now or something similar, what is some advice that you might give them?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to do this work, like this exact job, just to be involved, pay attention to what's going on with the environment, do what, focus on things like this in your undergrad, go to law school, and then focus on, for me, it was always about practical work experience. So I focused in law school. I did a lot of externships and internships, and was just always trying to be engaged with in that time, more social advocacy, more public defense groups, because that was what I wanted to focus on out of law school. But more broadly speaking, if like your goal is to, try to help the climate, to be an advocate, you just got to take good care of yourself, I think number one, and then I don't know. I think it's hard to say. It's each person's journey is so individual, but I think overall, just like I said, try to take good care of yourself, because if you don't take good care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else. And while it's true that there is a sense of a crisis happening, and like I said, I believe 100% that there are people like right now, while you and I are talking, that are being harmed by the things that we're all trying to do something about. So there is some urgency to it. Also, just taking a step back and taking a long view and asking yourself, both on a personal and professional level, what do you want to accomplish in 50 years? And so I don't mean to be like patronizing or philosophical about it, but I think that's really the key, is like, how do you get to that place? Like, where do you want to be a long time from now? And I think we all kind of get caught up in making these quick decisions day to day sometimes, and the progress can be limited in that way. So and that sort of frenzy, I think, can be really difficult for all of us in terms of health and just being in a good place to be in relationship with one another. So I mean, that's some advice, I think, but otherwise, just work hard, go to law school, make good connections, talk to people, and that's been the key. Just knowing people and knowing how to make those connections and believing in yourself. I'll say that, I guess, when I got this job, it was a strange application. They hadn't hired public defender in this office, and my experience was different than a lot of people's, and they saw something in me that was different, and they were open to hiring someone like me, and I think it's worked out well. And so don't be afraid to be different and to get to your destination in a different way, because I think that's actually what we need. Is we need people, maybe at least somewhat, we need people to take a different path, because the paths we've been taking haven't always worked out for us and have led us to this place that we're in now. Not to say that it's like a irreparable place, but we need to do a lot of work. So yeah, I don't know, some bits of advice that I'd have, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's really great advice. I mean, I do also want to ask, I guess like this is something that I've been asking everyone. If you could turn back time, but like butterfly effects aside, what is something that you might say to yourself who is, starting out at this work that you're doing?
Interesting question. I don't know. I'm kind of like drawing a blank. Like, if I could turn back time, what is something else that I would do to, I guess, support this work or to do this work? I don't know. I think I think I'm doing it. I think it's maybe just like I say, just listen to my own advice a little bit more, which is to take good care of myself, to be out in nature more, to listen to the water and the wind a little bit more, and to breathe that, to lay on the ground, feel it. I have a good friend, Marcia Small. She's a professor, and she told me, one time, just like what helps her when she's feeling like overwhelmed by life and the decisions that she has to make is just to lay flat on the ground and to feel that earth underneath you. And I've done it, and I do it. I do it all the time, and it helps. And it's both literally and figuratively grounding,
For
so
sure, yeah.
more of that, and I think would help me make longer term better decisions, and maybe make less work for myself as well. So maybe a little bit more of that if I could go back.
Yeah, no, I think we all definitely need more grounding, both I guess like figuratively and also literally, especially when everything is so heavy sometimes in this work for sure. Yeah, I do want to respect your time and thank you so much again. I truly learned so much from this conversation. If there are people that want to, keep up with the work that you're doing, be it Willow Project or just Earthjustice work in general, what are some resources that you would recommend they refer to?
Yeah, well, I think the Earthjustice website is really good, actually, and there's a lot of job opportunities on there, internship opportunities, student clerk opportunities for those that are interested in like the more practical aspect of it, but also all of our stories there. And then Earthjustice Alaska, we have our own page there, and you can link to that, and there's tons of information describing the work that we do. And if you want to be in touch with us, your folks are welcome to reach out to me. But there's also just a Earthjustice Alaska email that we do monitor, and so people are welcome to reach out to that and see if they can be engaged or have a discussion about whatever. So I think those are some helpful resources in terms of being engaged, and then just staying engaged with the administration and with your own government officials to the extent that you have time and interest in doing that. I think that's not only helpful to help them be informed, but helpful to your listeners to stay engaged, but also to learn from that process and to be better prepared moving forward.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. And I will be sure to, I guess, link everything in the description.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Heidi. Take care.